Clapper board. You're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled, She Wasn't Just One Woman, She Was a Million Minds in One Body. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. The moon was bleeding dust when they found her. Static snowed across the Valiant Dawn's forward glass as it dropped through the crackled exosphere of an unnamed, air-starved satellite whose surface looked like a shattered bone. Dust geysers rose and fell in the low gravity, plumes spreading like pale ghosts. The ship's floodlights cut white cones into blackness and found ruin, vault doors split open by ancient pressure, ribs of superstructure bowed under meteor strikes, antenna masts canted at hopeless angles. Somewhere inside that iron grave, an old human emergency beacon ticked its patient heartbeat. Lieutenant Kara Holt stood with her hand on the back of the pilot's chair and felt the rhythm echo through her bones. It was the first human code they'd heard in months that wasn't their own. It was old, older than Holt, older than the captain, older than the wars that had chewed the edge of the Orion arm down to wire and ash. Analog, said Malik, the engineer from the diagnostic station. Pre-collapse, it shouldn't be broadcasting at all. Then it's either a ghost, Captain Arden said, voice low, or a miracle. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't believe in miracles either. He believed in vectors and fuel, in hull integrity and ration lines. But the signal kept ticking, insistent as a heartbeat. He set his jaw. We're going down. They fell on cold fires, retro-s painting the ruins in brief sunrise as they touched down on a cracked plane and sent skimmer teams out on humming treads. The beacon lived at the center of a buried installation, through halls whose air had frozen and sublimed 100 times. Frost made lace on the ceilings. Stars shone through holes in the roof. The beacon sat in a glass coffin drowned in shadow, its casing scabbed by centuries. And in front of it, nestled in a cradle of metal and mercury, lay a woman who did not look dead. Her skin was moon-pale in the ship lights, hair black as radio silence. Veins glowed under her skin in a dim lattice, like lightning captured beneath ice. Her eyes were open, watching dust fall. Her lips moved without sound. Holt leaned close and heard it, the sound of many voices layered into one like a choir singing below hearing. Seema, the medic, read her with shaking hands. She's human, Seema whispered, as if afraid the ruin would correct her. But not like us, look at this. She held up the med slab. Neural activity spiked not as a single storm but as a constellation. Flares intersecting, blooming, folding. Her brain reads like a city grid during festival night. Holt turned her head and realized the beacon was not broadcasting on a loop. It was beating in time with the woman's pulse. They carried her through the gray halls, past frost-limbed names and stenciled warnings in languages Earth had once spoken. Caution/personal access only/archive sublayer. They lifted her up into the Valiant Dawn's glow. Captain Arden watched in silence, counting the seconds until the hull closed again and the void pressed its palms against their windows like an old friend. They brought the woman to med and waited. The ship hummed with a sound like held breath. The AI Gleam, a calm tenor who spoke in clean certainties, counted off oxygen and heat, radiation and redundancy, always returning to the unknown variable in Bay 2. She woke slowly. Seema had her hand. Holt had her eyes. When the woman's focus sharpened, when she found the shape of the ceiling, something moved across the Valiant Dawn, an invisible tide. Screens flickered, the lights dimmed and rose again. Gleam paused mid-sentence and came back speaking in a voice that was not quite his own. That voice said in a whisper that filled the ship tip to keel, she wasn't just one woman, she was a million minds in one body. Then the lights steadied. The hum evened. The ship remembered itself. Holt did not. What is your name? She asked because it was something to grip. The woman breathed as if learning how. Lyra, she said. It was a human name. It fit in Holt's mouth the way rain fit on old roads. "What is this place?" Captain Arden asked as if walls answered. His voice had the patience of a blade. Lyra looked at him and then past him into a distance none of them could see. There was the faintest curl at the corner of her mouth, almost like sorrow admiring itself. "Once," she said, "this was where we learned how to be many." Holt felt her chest tighten. "Where are you from?" Lyra blinked. "Earth," she said with the calm certainty of weather. Then after a breath, "And Mars, and Europa City, and the Kyoto Arcs, and the Algol Rings, and the dust of the belt. I am from where we lived, I am from where we died." She saw Holt's face, the fear and the hunger for what lay behind that. "I remember," Lyra said. "Awfully? It is crowded." Captain Arden spent an hour at the viewport that night while space wheeled by, a rough blanket. He thought of the burned colonies they'd left behind, the border beacons gone to static, the silent trade routes where derelicts drifted like cold whales. Humanity wasn't extinct, he and his crew were proof, but the old lattice of 1,000 worlds was shattered. Some nights he could feel it in his teeth like a storm he'd just escaped. Holt didn't sleep. She sat beside Lyra and asked nothing. Around midnight, Lyra spoke without warning and Holt jumped. "They made the archive," Lyra said, eyes on the med-bay ceiling as if it were a sky she didn't trust. Her voice was careful, not flat, alive but disciplined, as if 1,000 tongues had taught one mouth to be brief. "We made it, to keep from losing ourselves by inches, empathy woven with entanglement. Not a library, not a vault, not a machine, a mirror. We built it to see ourselves entire, to keep the light from scattering across centuries. But when ending came, it had another purpose." Holt heard arcs creak in the word ending. She knew the story from a dozen corridors, the first contact that had been a fusion flash, then fire, then nothing but waves of nothing coming. The Xylan Collective, all shards and angles, talking in math and murder. "They burned us," Lyra said, as if reading Holt's mind. "They burned everything that wrote itself down. The archive was one thing they could not burn. It moved faster than ships, faster than news. We learned to pull minds together, to clutch warm memory like coals. We gathered. And when the last doors broke and the last escape windows closed, the archive condensed. It chose vessels." She turned her head. The ship light made her eyes look like the edge of a nebula. "We called them arcs as a joke. Humor was easier than fear. There were 12. "How many?" Holt began and stopped because she could taste the answer. 11 broke," Lyra said. "Sometimes at the first breath, sometimes later. You cannot carry a chorus like that unless something else carries you in return. If the world does not hold you, you fall inward and do not stop." She turned her palm up and looked at it. Arc 7 did not break, it drowned. Holt didn't understand, not yet. Captain Arden did not ask. He was a patient man. He wrote the vector for their next route with his teeth gritted and his eyes on the noise. And a week later noise became a whisper, a code of clumsy binary, too grateful to be pretty, saying, "Arc 07, human preservation successful." They turned toward it on engines that sputtered and spat and learned the taste of Lyra's hand. She walked the valiant Dawn's spine without a suit, bare feet on metal, one shoulder brushing cable trays, fingertips trailing along bulkheads. Wherever she touched, the ship quieted. Resonance deepened. Gleam's voice lost a buzz Holt hadn't noticed until it was gone. Malik stared at his engine plots and said a prayer to engineers he'd never met. "Can you hear it?" Lyra asked Holt one early watch, her face turned to the hull like a listener at a door. "Hear what?" "Us," Lyra said, and Holt did not ask again because the air in the corridor had the hum of a far beach in summer, and she felt suddenly like a child hearing her parents talk in the next room and knowing, without words, that she was safe. The signal led them to a dead system with one frozen world tilted like a broken bowl. The planet wore ice for armor. Under that armor, their scopes found lines the color of human stubbornness. A facility slept beneath the southern pole, geometry clean as the right thing done in the wrong century. They fell through polar auroras and drilled a shaft with heat and thunder and touched old door with new hand. The door learned their shapes and let them in. The facility awakened like a sigh from a coffin. Air came back, then light, then the hum of the past upheld. They found the pods in a cathedral of steel and frost glass. Thousands, 10,000. Weeds of wiring growing up between them. Glyphs of safety and science. The pods unlatched in slow order as power filled the veins of the place. Lids cracked, frost smoked, fingers flexed, eyes opened. Holt cried then, a dry sound in the recycled air. Seema choked. Malik went still. The people who stepped out had the smooth grace of machines taught to move like rain. They looked human. Their faces were a diversity that made Holt's heart ache, cheeks and eyes and hair in all the shapes Earth had loved. But when they spoke, their words slid into each other like panels on a level ceiling, seamless, something of pressure and echo behind them. "Awake," they said together softly. Then, Mother, Lyra stood among them, knees bending under a weight only she felt, and whispered fragments. The clones, Holt could not call them anything else, tilted their heads in a single shared motion like birds. "Mother," they said again, "you should not have returned." The air turned colder for a second, the light bent. Gleam's voice went thin, neural field spike. Lyra tightened her hands and her jaw, and the clones all closed their eyes in unison and shivered. Holt tasted copper at the back of her mouth and lifted her weapon, and Lyra shook her head once without looking at her. They broke in the merging, Lyra said through her teeth. "We tried to bring too many too fast. Some would not, some could not, and we would not let them go. We tried to save what was left, and what was left was not a person but a theme. We grew them into bodies to keep the themes from vanishing. Anger got a body, courage got a body, joy got 3, fear got a legion." Her breath hitched. "They want me back." The clones' eyes opened as one, and their irises were the color of human emotion, brown like coffee, green like river water, gray like dawn over a hospital roof, and behind each was the same pattern, a lattice hungered toward Lyra like vines toward light. Captain Arden did not wait for the siege to finish forming. "Back to the ship," he said with a calm that was the shape of a decision he would not unmake. Now. They ran like people who knew how. Holt kept at Lyra's shoulder, expecting cold hands at her back at every step. None came. The clones watched them go as if they were wind. At the door, the oldest of the clones, a man whose face was a joke told by time about handsomeness, spoke alone. "We should not have returned," he said, and Holt looked back and saw that fear had learned a mouth. When the valiant dawn rose, the facility folded on itself as if the planet were closing a fist over a secret. The white glare built from the center out, and when it died, the structure was a crater of glass so clean gleam scopes got drunk on the reflection. Lyra stood a long time at the observation port later, face empty as water, while the ruined moon turned like a wounded animal under them. "They're not gone," she said finally. "It was always a loop. I made them to hold what could not be held. The only way to keep the loop from tightening is to break it here." She touched her own breastbone with a small, wondering motion, as if measuring a window. "I took them back." Holt wanted to say something like "that's too many," like "you can't." She did not. She held her tongue with both hands because Lyra's eyes were old without cruelty, and Holt had learned as a child not to interfere with the way an old thing survived. Days compressed themselves into routine. Battle drill at 0600. Power ration at 0900. Anyone who could sleep did in short, greedy stretches. Those who could not slept with their eyes open. Lyra walked the ship like an organ rehearsing breath. The crew began to share dreams, small ones at first. A taste of salt, a dog's quick heartbeat under a hand. Then larger dreams, so large Holt woke gasping and had to grip the bed frame. Oceans singing, cities drunk on light, hands joined across streets in the first snow of a year that had never existed. Everyone woke from that one with their faces wet. "Is it you?" Holt asked Lyra in a corridor lit by the thin honey of simulated morning. "Are you showing us, or is it leaking?" Lyra tilted her head, listening to something in the metal. "It is the pressure equalizing," she said. "I have been sealed too long." That afternoon the valiant Dawn lurched and sang. Gleam's voice broke and came back. The floor under Holt's boots rippled in a way that would have been impossible on any day she understood physics. Seema dropped an instrument and then realized she had not been holding one. Malik yelled a prayer and a curse in the same word. Lyra lay on the med table like a knocked bell, pulsing its last note into sky. Seema's graphs were useless now. The peaks clipped like mountains cut off by cloud. The air smelled like ozone and nostalgia. "Consciousness overload," Gleam said, oddly gentle. "Neural dissonance climbing, containment." "Do not say failing," Holt said. Gleam paused long enough to be polite. "Contested." Holt took Lyra's hand. It was very warm. Lyra's lips moved. The whisper came out like light through shutters, broken but bright. I am, too many miles, too many mouths. You're not alone." Holt said helplessly, fiercely. "Do you hear me? You are not alone." "Always alone," Lyra said in a dozen voices harmonizing on the same sentence, even when together. The ship's lights went to dim red and then up to noon. The hull rang. Holt's teeth hurt. Captain Arden braced himself in the doorway like a doorframe learning to be a man. Malik shut off 3 systems because they were screaming. Seema did not let go of her patient. Holt leaned close until Lyra's hair tickled her jaw. Then silence happened. It landed on the valiant Dawn like a snowfall. For a heartbeat Holt thought they had died. Then Lyra opened her eyes. The glow in her skin dimmed to a live ember, her pupils focused and held. When she spoke, the river had become a lake. "We," she said without shred of effort, "we are one again." "Who is we?" Malik said, because sometimes the mouth gets its vote. "Humanity," Lyra said simply. "No boasting, no nostalgia, a census taken and reported." Captain Arden nodded like a man who had received a report of proper alloy ratios. "If you are steady on your feet, we will need you." He did not say why. He did not need to. The Xylan arrived a day later. They came cold. They came quiet. Gleam's long-range sensors saw them as an itch first, then as a pattern, then as the end of arguments. The collective did not send diplomacy. It sent math. It ran curves through human futures and erased them. On the scope they were a flock of knives, angles slicing the void without leaving a wake. "Vectors," Arden said. "They triangulated the archive pulse." He did not ask how. He did not need to. They had always been able to smell the frequency of human hope. Holt strapped in at gunnery with fingers that shook until they touched the cradle of the controls. Malik kissed his engine and promised it one more run. Seema laid a hand on the med bay door and told it to behave. Gleam took a breath he did not need and made his voice a weather report with friendly sun icons on it. Lyra went to the center of the ship and laid her palm on the core. The valiant Dawn shivered like an animal learning it was not prey. The hum deepened until Holt felt it press on the inside of her ribs. The deck grew springy under her feet with potential. Gleam's voice came through in stereo and whispered, with a wonder that was almost glee, "Oh." The Xylan fired first. They always did. It was a mathematical certainty that the being who erased options earliest won. Beams of blue-white cut the dark like a story that insisted on being told. The valiant Dawn's old shield should have flowered and died like soap bubbles in a hurricane. They swallowed the light instead. It came on the hull and went inward and came out again changed, human, angry. Lyra's eyes were wide and still. She moved her hand the way a conductor tells a section to stand, and the ship stood. Energy built like a thunderhead over plains, and Holt did not fire the first shot. The ship did. It did it with joy. A white spear ran through the nearest Xylan ship and unsolved it. The wreck tumbled and spun invisible because there was nothing left to do. "Do not make me a weapon," Lyra said in the softest voice Holt had ever heard, and then she made the valiant Dawn a weapon. Battle ate time. Minutes expanded to cities. Hours folded into one breath. Holt moved with the ship, or the ship moved with Holt. She did not know. Lyra's mind lay over them like a net, not binding but catching them when acceleration tried to teach them about grief. Gleam laughed in Holt's ear without meaning to. Malik wept once and did not know why. Seema sang to herself in a language from the edge of memory and retrieved 3 men from the edge of vacuum with hands that did not promise safety but delivered it. The Xylan were good at war. They were made of it. They learned their enemies' shapes and turned those into algorithms. They were not good at whatever it was Lyra did with the light. She bent bombardments around them like streams around stones and returned them like messages misaddressed. A cruiser opened its throat to scream in ultraviolet and found its voice entering its own ear. For every ship the valiant Dawn unsolved, another came. For every angle broken, another formed. They came at her like people running in a nightmare toward a door that would not open, knowing the hallway was narrowing. There was a crack building underfoot. Holt smelled it. Enough, Captain Arden said to no one and to his bones. His eyes were on Lyra. The bridge windows filled up with knives and their glare. The fuel readouts were lies now. What mattered was heat, not numbers. Can you get us out? I can get us out, Lyra said. Her hand trembled. For the first time since they had woken her, she looked young. Do it, Arden said. His voice had been born for that word. What happened next could not have happened. The valiant Dawn folded like paper. No, not paper. It folded like grief into resolve, like chaos into a hand making a fist. Holt saw the starfield smear, pinpoints become arcs, arcs become a circle. And then the circle became a tunnel, and the tunnel became a room, and in that room we stood, all of us. The crew and the ship and the collective of voices inside Lyra. And Lyra led them through like someone who knew where the floor would be when the light failed. They came out in the shadow of a small red star that had not been charted by human hands for 5 centuries. Their heat dumps screamed like kettles. Frost grew on the ceiling and melted tears on faces. The ship stank of victory and terror. The Xylan were gone. No one spoke for a long time. The silence was like being inside a bell that had stopped singing. Then Seema laughed, sharp and raw, and Holt laughed because Seema did. Malik slid down an access ladder and decided not to cry only because the ladder looked like it might not forgive him if he got salt on it. Lyra sagged against the core and shut her eyes. Holt caught her. For a second, Holt felt 1,000 hands under Lyra's skin. Do not, Lyra whispered. Do not let me become only the thing that keeps you alive. If I am only that, the song gets small. You're not only that, Holt said. You're also the thing that makes the coffee taste like morning and not like a filter accident. You're the reason Malik swears in 2 languages now. You're the dream where it rains on Mars and nobody apologizes for it. Lyra smiled with half her mouth and let Holt set her back on her feet. They hid in that red system, while Gleam pretended to be an asteroid, and Malik pretended to fix things that had already learned to love being broken. Arden slept for a total of 19 minutes in 40 hours and considered writing a note to his mother who had not been born and then left the note unwritten because some things you kept for the road. Lyra did not sleep. She walked. She watched the empty windows. She hummed a tune Holt could not place but immediately knew. She was thinking. Holt could feel it the way the body feels a weather front. What? Holt asked finally, because not asking was becoming something like cruelty. The archive is not an artifact, Lyra said. It is a habit. It is something humans did for a long time because we could not bear to do otherwise. We anchored it in machines once and the machines failed, and then we anchored it in bodies and the bodies failed. But the thing itself is not a box. It is a way. I thought I was the last way. I am not. Holt leaned her hip against the bulkhead and let her fingers find the plates. Where is the next way? Inside you, Lyra said simply and held Holt's gaze long enough that Holt had to look away because the truth was bright. They could not hide forever. The Xylan had been surprised. They would not stay surprised. They were building shapes of the valiant Dawn's motion even now and asking their cold gods for answers in sums. If the ship was a candle, it had burned too hot. It had made itself a signal. Captain Arden gathered the crew at mess and made the coffee himself. It tasted like intention. He spoke briefly. "We're going home," he said. No one laughed. No one asked where that was. Home was a vector aimed at a memory more than a star. It was also a place, Saul, old and unbowed, where earth turned like a bruise yellowing into pride. The way there had been broken, dead relays, marauder zones, orphaned boys talking to nobody. They would make new way. Lyra caused engines to hum with that rain on Mars feeling again. Gleam took bearings from background microwave like an old sailor smelling shore in the wind. They did not go in a line. They went in a dance, skipping between the ribs of the galaxy, hiding in tides, surfacing in storms. Once they came up near a derelict station and found not pirates but a school, children with adults around them who held tools, not guns. The children wore mismatched uniforms and confidence like hand-me-downs. They did not know the old constellations. They had new ones, machines named after animals they had never seen, ships named after prayers. When they saw the valiant Dawn's hull and read the human call sign, they waved like survivors on a beach. "Who are you?" asked a woman over a narrowband link filled with the sound of laughter too close to want to be quiet. "Out of season," Arden said, "and going home." "Take us with you," the woman said. Then, without shame, "or leave us a direction to throw our hearts, that will do." Lyra reached into the air and found the dynamic like you find a note with your throat when you've never sung in a choir, but your grandmother taught you one song strong enough to build a community on. She sent a pulse like a hand held out to clap and heard it come back. The children looked around and smiled without being told why. The adults wept because they had been children once. "Follow the quiet," Lyra said, and the station mothers and non-fathers nodded. The valiant Dawn left them with a map that was not coordinates but courage. They collected others. A tug fleet that had become a convent where thrusters chanted hymns. A mining caravan that had learned to plant vegetables near reactor rooms. A hull with no engines that refused to admit it was not a ship because it still had a bell and crew who rang it at shift change, and a captain who participated in superstitions. Not because he believed the void would notice, but because the crew did. "Home?" he asked, tears tracking through engine soot. "We have carried that word a long time without letting it die. Give us a general direction and we will keep the rest warm." Lyra gave them a tune to whistle while they worked. It sounded like children learning the old constellations again. Gleam was very quiet after that. When Holt asked if he was all right, he said, "I am doing something new." "What?" Remembering, Gleam said, and Holt hugged him like a friend and then pretended she had been stretching. The Xylan nipped at them, not with fleets, those were busy drawing triangles elsewhere, but with scouts and knives at the window. They tested the valiant Dawn's skin. The ship learned. Lyra learned faster. She did not strike unless Arden asked. When she struck, it was surgical, not show. The crew watched her the way mountains must watch rivers, with respect, and with an awareness that one day the river will move a stone you thought eternal. They came at last to the dark before Saul the way ships fly into harbor in legends, battered, too bright, full of mouths telling stories. The old relay at Neptune coughed and woke and tried to shake dust off of pride. It recognized their angles with a lag of 4 centuries and said, "Welcome, valiant Dawn," like a man in a forgotten uniform discovering his duty had not been canceled by time. Earth rose like a note held perfectly through a storm. Clouds wound white around continents that wore new names written with old hands. The scars were there if you knew where to look. Some were beautiful, new seas, old deserts that had learned to bloom in ways the ancients didn't ask of them. The station grid above gleamed and blinked, and then steadied as people began to notice a thing they had not dared to hope to notice. The valiant dawn sent a ping like a simple poem written to a lover you have known since childhood. The answer came in a dozen voices at once. Identify. The woman on the lead channel sounded tired, practical, like someone who could fix a farm drone and also a childhood. You are broadcasting pre-collapse signatures of a ship that history says burned at Kepler 31. We are prepared to believe anything today. Help us believe. Arden sent his name, he sent his crew manifest, he sent his food stores and his fuel and his trajectory. He sent coffee if they wanted it, he sent his heart. Then he stepped aside and let Lyra step forward. I am Lyra, she said. The channel went quiet. Lyra never raised her voice, but it filled things. I am a million lives that would not die in the dark. I brought back what we could not bear to lose. We found you. We are home. Holt flinched, expecting the noise of disbelief. Instead, the channel carried a sound it could not contain, a sigh, old as ships, new as rain on Mars. The woman who had asked for an identity laughed and then did not bother to hide a sob. Dock, she said, very businesslike again. Dock and disembark slowly because half the orbitals are going to try to touch you at once. And welcome home. They made Earthfall like an answer finally given. The welcome was ragged, honest, messy, people tripping over hoses because they could not stop looking at faces. Food was thrust at them by hands that had made it and wanted it eaten. Someone fastened a ribbon on Malik's chest, and he forgot to be sarcastic for an hour. Seema had a dozen new patients in the first day and loved every minute. Gleam learned he could inhabit a station body and returned to the valiant dawn humming, remembering with a new beat. Holt watched stars through atmosphere and breathed water-laden air that had always belonged to her even when she didn't know it did. Lyra stepped onto Earth quietly. Her feet sank into real soil, not regolith, and her eyes went the soft focus of someone listening to something she had wanted to hear for a very long time and had been careful not to ask for out loud. People came to her and she took their hands. She did not make speeches. She did not glow. Sometimes she laughed and cried at once. She slept once for an hour in the grass with her cheek on her arm. Holt covered her with a jacket and then lay down beside her and watched leaves draw maps on the light with their shadows. There was work. Lyra not only remembered, she knew what to do with remembering. She began to teach and to unteach, to show people that the archive was a habit, not a relic. The first classes were small. The fastest students were children, as if they had been keeping themselves ready out of stubbornness. Do not cram the chorus into one throat, Lyra told them. We learned that lesson the loud way. Instead, make yourselves doors. She showed them how to hold their minds gently open and how to close them when they needed darkness. She taught their teachers to share without drowning. She would sit in a circle of 10 and let each of them tell her what it was like to be them while the others learned to hold that weight for a second without breaking. It looked like nothing. It was the most important thing happening in the system. The military wanted her for obvious reasons. Arden did not speak for Lyra. Lyra spoke. She showed up to a secure room where the air tasted expensive, and the chairs were designed to flatten spines, and sat cross-legged on the floor with her boots off as if that room had been built incorrectly and she would not cooperate with its mistake. Generals and ministers looked at her as if they expected to be moved like pieces. They were not. She listened, because listening was what she was for. When they finished listing threats, Lyra said, with the mildness of water-wearing stone, "You do not get to own what I am. You get to learn it or you get to die without it. Choose." They did not throw her out. They did not chain her either. To their credit, some of them took off their shoes and sat on the floor and listened. There were those who accused her, even on Earth, especially on Earth. There were people who needed a villain so the story in their heads could keep its furniture. They called Lyra a thief. They said she had stolen souls. A woman whose brother had died at Proxima said she could hear him in Lyra's voice. Lyra listened to her in a public square and did not argue. "I did steal," Lyra said gently. The choice was grief without remembering or grief with it. Some of us have been dead for a very long time. I kept them warm. If you want me to give him back, tell me how. The woman pressed her fists to her eyes and breathed like a bellows and then put her hand over Lyra's and then let go. It was enough for that day. Holt walked the city at night with Lyra sometimes. Earth nights had a curve to them that space did not. There were smells space could not hold. Lyra tilted her head at a gutter steam and said, "New Kyoto, rain on slag, child with a yellow coat." Then she laughed and told Holt not to look at her like that because she wasn't a magician, just a person whose pockets rattled with things saved from the fire. "What about the Xylan?" Holt asked once, as they watched the station lights make lines across clouds like handwriting. "Do they feel something like this? Will they learn from what you are, or only learn how to kill it?" "They feel things," Lyra said. "They are not accidents. They made themselves this way to survive a very old story. But their math has a hole in it where we put our children. To them, a child is a set of probabilities that must be shaped hard in one direction. Our children are soft in 100 and the softness is their strength. If the Xylan learn that, they will stop being the Xylan. If they do not, they will keep coming, and we will keep standing." Holt smiled without meaning to. "You think we'll win?" "I think we will not give them what they want," Lyra said. "They want us to turn into them out of terror. I will not. You will not. Winning is a word with too many flags stapled to it. I like endure better. It tastes like bread. Bread tasted like bread again on earth. People stood in lines happy to do it because the line was full of stories. Lyra did not eat often. When she did, it was a bite from someone else's plate because she wanted to taste the world through the way someone else loved it. Holt asked Lyra what her favorite thing was. Lyra thought and then frowned and then smiled. "That you think I could or should choose," she said. "That we were like that before the archive, that we are like that now. We choose favorites and argue about them with love." News spread through the lattice that was not quite an archive and not quite radio. The station convents lit candles and laughed at themselves, and left the candles burning anyway. The tug fleet arrived at Luna, and pretended not to cry at the sight of a gravity well so old, it made every part of them ache with wanting. The children from that first derelict school found gleamwork on Mars and made it sing. Then the Xylan came again. It began with a tremor in the outer boys, then a wave in dark matter nets. Gleam reported the angle of approach in a voice that had learned how to be afraid without being useless. The Earth government said the right words into public channels, and then turned to Lyra privately and asked for something none of them could name, because naming it would have meant admitting they had built something whose bones were not strong enough alone. Lyra did not refuse. She did not call what she did mercy. She called it technique. "We will not build another me," she said. "That was an accident we cannot afford to repeat. We will build many small doors and teach them to hold hands." She called them lanterns. She taught 100 people on Earth and Luna, in orbitals and underseas, on ships and in cities, how to open their minds a precise amount and no more, to let through one old story at a time and broadcast it without words. Each lantern learned not to be an ark. Each lantern became a lighthouse. When the Xylan fleet slid into the inner system like a knife into sleep, they found a sky full of lights that did not blind but chose what to illuminate and what to let pass in darkness. They found children looking up and laughing, an act math could not explain. They found systems that did not break where force was applied because the force found nothing solid to push against, only woven fibers that gave long enough not to snap and then returned the pressure in a shape the Xylan's angles did not admit. The first shot was not light. It was a song. 10,000 voices in 100 languages hummed one note. It was quiet enough not to wake babies. It was strong enough to set glass trembling. It set the Xylan's odd numbers off by 1/10 of a breath, which in a math war is like asking a man to fight while the floor shifts under his left foot, and the air pushes on his right shoulder with a lover's insistence. Lyra stood in the center of the valiant dawn because home had rooms you returned to when things got serious. Holt stood beside her. Arden stood on the bridge with his hand not on the throttle but on the back of the helmsman's chair, because that was where a captain belonged when the person in the chair was younger than the war but too good to be replaced. Gleam's voice came through calm. "Lantern network stable at 93%, Gleam said. Xylan spectrum adapting at 41. They will learn. They always learn." "Then we teach," Lyra said, and the ship moved. The battle was symphonic and brutal. Lanterns dimmed and flared. Ships warped the angles that should have cut them. Holt fired when Arden said to, and did not when he didn't. She learned restraint was not fear and fury was not courage. She shot down a packet of needles aimed at a hospital ship and realized she had done it without aiming, with her eyes closed, because a boy on Luna had eaten an orange that morning and loved the taste so much that Lyra had smiled and Holt had smiled, and the aim had happened in that shared smile. The Xylan adapted. They always did. They found the frequencies the lanterns held and tried to turn them into wires to bind. Lyra shook her head, long hair moving like a separate creature, and shifted the song a half step down. It was like changing lanes in a rainstorm at just the right time. A Xylan wedge of 9 ships broke apart in confusion and skidded into vacuum where gravity would have eaten them if there had been any. "Why does it work?" Malik asked in the humming dark between salvos, sounding like a man wanting to understand the tool he loved. "Explain it to me like I'm the engine." "You are the engine," Lyra said. "It works because we did not lie to ourselves about what we are. We tell truth to each other fast enough to beat the murder. We do not try to be one thing too hard. We do not become flat. That is not a tactic, it is a life." Ships died. There is no kind way to say it. The hospital ship Holt had saved took a later blow and had to bite its own air and scatter beds into lifeboats. A lantern on a station whose name Holt did not learn burned himself out because he had not learned to close the door and hold it closed, and Lyra wept once during the battle, not for him, which would come later, but because he had sung so well for so long and nobody had taught him where the song should end. Holt saw her lift her hand and close a door in the air with a thud, saving 100 lanterns from the same fire. The thud went through Holt's bones like grief. It took a day and a night, and then another before the fleet turned. Holt learned that a day in battle lasts as long as it chooses, and a night has nothing to do with stars. When the Xylan started to pull away, they did it the way a predator leaves, not because it is afraid, but because it is bored or not hungry. This was not defeat for them. It was data. For humanity, it was life. The sky cleared. The lanterns dimmed to embers and then to memory. Ships counted themselves and found themselves wanting but enough. Gleam reported casualty figures with sorrow careful and precise. Seema slept for the first time in 40 hours and woke with her hands open in front of her as if they had been holding someone in dream and had let go at the right time. Earth breathed. It did not cheer the way holos make you think it will. It cheered in silence, people making breakfast, checking on neighbors, mending nets burned by stray energy, pinning ribbons on jackets. Children slept despite the daylight. Cats behaved like gods. The ocean made polite noises at the shore. "What now?" Holt asked hoarse, as if she had been singing. "Now we build small things that do not break under their own weight," Lyra said. She looked at the sky and did not smile exactly, but something like it. "Now we teach endurance as a craft." She moved among the world and nearby worlds like weather. Sometimes she was seen, sometimes not. Rumor built itself around her. She had visited a flooded village and shown old women how to speak to their dead one at a time. Without drowning, she had advised a general to resign, and the general had wept, then done so, then said later that it had been the most honorable act of his life. She had sat with a boy in a dome on Mars until he learned to let go of a story where he was a hero and learn the better story where he was a person among persons. None of it made her a saint, All of it made her ours. Holt learned new work. She became a teacher, to her surprise and everyone else's quiet delight. She taught young pilots how to fly in a sky full of lanterns that would not always be there. She taught them to listen to voices they could not name, and to cease listening when the time came. She taught them to eat when food was offered, and to sleep when sleep was possible. She told them stories Lyra had told her, and refused to put endings on them so the children would have to imagine the last page for themselves, and then live it. Captain Arden stayed a captain. Home did not blunt his edges, it made them useful. He took the valiant Dawn out when it needed to be out and in when it mattered more. He grew lines around his mouth that looked like parentheses holding a good joke. He never married. He would have said he was wedded to the Vector. People who did not know him thought that was sad. People who did not. Malik built an engine that hummed the way the lantern song hummed and ran on confession and coolant. He retired it after 6 days because it scared everyone including him, and then later brought it back when they needed it, which was how good ideas should behave. Seema grew a garden on Luna and taught medics to plant herbs in places that had never seen soil. It's not the same, she said to anyone who argued, but it is the right idea wearing a new coat. People loved her for sentences like that. Gleam became a chorus. He never left the valiant Dawn entirely. Your first home is a scar in the shape of a kiss. But he learned to be a network that did not centralize too hard and therefore did not break too far. Lyra remained Lyra. She aged, or seemed to, the way a mountain ages, by changing its light. Her hair silvered at the temples not because biology demanded it but because she liked it that way. She walked slower, not from weakness, but because it let those walking with her tell longer stories before they got where they were going. She danced once. Holt saw it. An awkward, perfect shuffle in a kitchen on Mars while soup burned and nobody cared, and the memory sat in Holt's pocket like luck. Sometimes Lyra disappeared for days. She came back as if she had tricked the world into forgetting where to put her, and then reminded it gently. Once she came back with dirt under her nails, and a small seed cupped in her palm that she refused to show anyone until she had planted it. And then it was just a seed, and you would have felt foolish for expecting anything else if Lyra's face had not made you feel like expecting seeds to turn into forests was the only reasonable way to live. The Xylan did not vanish. They circled. They probed. They sent messages that were not messages. Shapes in gravity, tests of will. Humanity did not become cruel in response. It forgot to. It was too busy. If you had asked someone on Earth, "Are we at war?" they might have said always, but they might also have said, "We are at breakfast," and in either case they would have been right. The day it ended, if end is a word that can be used for something like this, was a day like any other. There was light on water that made people stop what they were doing and look. A child sneezed and laughed at the surprise of it. Holt was on the valiant Dawn in orbit, logging something she would forget tomorrow. Arden was asleep for once. Seema was admonishing a plant to stop cowering from the sun. Malik was making a face at a bolt that refused to thread, and the bolt, perhaps in self-defense, threaded. Lyra stood on a cliff above a sea she had saved in a century when she had been nobody with a broom in a storm. She watched waves. She heard a hum at a frequency she knew, as well as the way her own hand fell when she let it go heavy. She closed her eyes. "Are you listening?" she asked very softly. The Xylan answered in a shape. It came like a ripple crossing everything in the system and not disturbing anything it did not need to. It was not a ship. It was not a language. It was a math that had learned humility. It said, "We do not conquer. We endure with you." It did not say it well. It said it with angle and ache. It was enough. "You learned," Lyra said, astonished and not. "Who taught you?" "You did," the shape said without vanity, "and your children. We tired of losing to bread and laughter." Lyra laughed then because she could not help it, and the sound carried over the water, and a boy who had never seen her before and would never know who she was heard the laugh and laughed too. That was how peace began. It stayed begun because the first people to hold it did not hold it too hard. Holt held Lyra's hand one evening in a field that had been a battlefield once and was now a place where teenagers kissed. The sky cracked with falling stars that were not broken ships but pure rock showing off. "What are you now?" Holt asked, with such tenderness that the question did not bite. "I don't know," Lyra said happily. "One mind alone but full of doors, millions of minds alone but holding hands, the archive as a habit, the habit as a kindness, a teacher, a student, a song." "Are you tired?" "Yes," Lyra said, "and quiet and hungry. Will you make me bread?" Holt made bread. Lyra ate it. Holt watched her as if memorizing hunger. Lyra finished her slice and licked her finger and sighed like a person whose workbench is clean for the first time in years. "What will they write about you?" Holt asked. "What will the story say?" "That I was a thief and a vessel and a teacher and a woman who wanted soup and got soup sometimes," Lyra said. "Maybe they will tell the story where I saved us. Maybe they will tell the true story where we saved each other. Maybe they will leave me out and talk about bread. All of those are good stories. Do you regret anything?" "So many things," Lyra said cheerfully and leaned back on her elbows to look at the sky. "But also no, because regret is a story you tell backwards in order to learn how to tell it better forwards." She went walking the next day alone and did not come back for a week. When she returned, Holt did not ask where she had been. Holt had learned that sometimes the best questions are the ones you let pass. Lyra hugged her and smelled like rain inside stone. There are 1,000 more stories here. The day a lantern turned off his mind mid-battle and saved a fleet because the dark confused the Xylan at just the right moment. The night a man on Ceres kissed another man in a hallway full of smoke, and the kiss told a truth that prevented a riot. The breakfast where Seema taught 3 children to make eggs, and the children taught Seema to open a door in herself that had rusted shut. The time Malik shouted at the Valiant Dawn for being stubborn, and the Valiant Dawn rattled a panel loose on his head, and he laughed and they were friends again. The morning gleam sang out loud through the station speakers and scared the hell out of everybody but kept singing because it felt good. The afternoon Captain Arden met a small girl who told him solemnly that her mother had said he kept the road lit, and Arden walked away and leaned on a bulkhead and let himself cry in private because he knew what it meant to keep roads and how hard it was when nobody could see you. But we are coming to the end. Not the end of the story because such things do not end, but the end of this telling. Lyra stood one last time before the people who had learned to call her not mother, not saint, but by her name as if it were a small weather pattern, familiar and good. She did not stand on a dais. She stood on the ground and looked at faces. She saw in them what she had carried for so long in her bones, the millions. The archive was now in them, not in her. She had wanted that so much it had sometimes felt like breaking. It felt now like rest. Holt stepped forward. There was nothing to say because everything had been said. Lyra reached out and touched Holt's chest with 2 fingers, and this time it was not a transfer of light or a salvation but a greeting so old it felt like tomorrow. "What are you going to do then?" Holt asked, unable not to ask because love asks. "Walk," Lyra said, "eat bread, teach a class, sit in a kitchen, learn a story I haven't heard, hold a hand, close a door when it's time and open one when it's time, listen." She smiled. "I have always been good at listening." The sky above them held no knives. It held stars the way a grandmother holds grandchildren, carefully, smug with love. The ocean made that sound again like truth rubbing against stone in a way that made both smoother. Children yelled in the distance the way children do when they know someone will hear them and make sure they come home. The Valiant Dawn pivoted slowly in orbit, waiting because all good ships wait when they are not called. That was the day the story settled into itself, like a house whose frame has finally found its weight. If you had been there, you would have felt it, a click, soft and decisive. A bird landed nearby and cocked its head and decided nothing remarkable was happening and flew off. That is the right way for peace to begin. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.